First of all, I want to pay respect to the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also wish everyone happy May Day. Our union is a community sector union, along with many other industries, but half our members are in the community sector. So I'm going to talk about our equal pay campaign, but not for too long. And then I'm going to talk about hopefully some heretical ideas about community organising, or what some people call sometimes community organising. The community sector part of the ASU is one of the youngest unions in the country. It was formed as a union in the 1970s, and that's a whole interesting story in itself, but I won't go into that today in my speech. I did want to say that it's really unusual for charities and NGO workers to actually be unionised or be in unions in other countries. It's very unusual. It's not the case in the US, it's barely the case in the UK, and if you look at Europe, it's hardly ever that community sector workers are actually union members, and that's to do with our unique history. And our equal pay fight, we can, like all unions like to do, hold it up as being something different and special and amazing, but actually it's really no different to what other workers have done at other times in history in Australia or in other countries. And that's a really simple thing. Our workers are paid so appallingly for the work they do. There's such a gap between the skills and the job that they do working with the marginalised and the disadvantaged in the community and how much they get paid. On average, they get paid $45,000. Most workers need to have a degree to do the work that they do. It is such a glaring injustice. And so all we're really doing is we see that injustice, our members know it, and we're fighting as hard as we possibly can to change the situation. And when it comes down to it, that is all we're really doing. And it's the same fight that teachers had really 80 years ago, nurses had when they were trained in hospitals and they were considered caring workers, and therefore their pay was pretty terrible. Same fight the BLF had, that bricklayers had, where they were considered unskilled workers and treated like dogs on workplaces. So the reason why they fought, same why the MUA fought when everyone was treated like second-class citizens in hiring halls. All those fights are exactly the same, really, as our fight. And so the tactics that we employ in this campaign and the strategy we use, to be honest, we're using just absolutely everything we possibly can. We know it's a fight, and so we're going to bring to that fight every bit of skill, every bit of thought, every bit of pressure point we possibly can in order to win it. The only real difference is, I suppose, the ideological perspective of our union, and that is that we believe in maximising rank and file involvement in everything we do, but wherever possible in campaigning. We also really believe in mobilising. We believe that's important because it builds confidence amongst the membership, but it also builds commitment and activism amongst your people who are already in the union and already probably delegates. Our goal really is to build ourselves into such a fighting force that governments and employers are afraid of us. Like, to be brutally honest, that's really what it's about, because that's what we think power is. And we think once we're at that point, we'll be in a position like the teachers and like nurses where they get listened to when they have issues. We've got a whole lot of things we've got to overcome, and some of them are things that the union movement's really struggled to overcome. We've mainly got small workplaces. The average size of our workplaces is 4 workers, and we've got, I think about 5,000-6,000 workplaces across New South Wales. And that's a very labour intensive if you are just approaching that on a workplace by workplace way of campaigning. We have a massive turnover, and we have a massive turnover because the wages are so crap, and so we have to recruit 1,500 workers every single year just to keep up with the turnover that happens. So until we get growth, we've got to recruit that many until we get any further. The same thing too is the delegate and activist turnover really kills you, because it takes years for someone to be trained as a delegate or as an activist and to put all of that work in, and then they leave. And they usually leave because your delegates and your activists are really good workers and the best people, and they leave and they go work in the public sector for $30,000 more for doing exactly the same job. So having to renew your activist base all the time is something that makes it hard. We also have employer turnover, which sounds really weird, but in the community sector, there's votes for who the bosses are every single year. And quite often, the people that end up being on voluntary management committees have got no idea whatsoever about, basic rights for workers. And so you end up having fights about just simple things that would never happen in Sydney Water, never happen in Qantas, never happen in any other part of our union, because you've got, I suppose, a base level understanding that, you've got to pay people what the award says. And the fact that what that leads to is that the pressures on the union to be able to respond to day-to-day crisis is actually huge. Also, we've got a really high number of non-full-time workers, historically harder to organise for all obvious reasons, which I could go into later for those who can't see why it's obvious. But despite this, over the last 15 years, our membership's tripled. We grow on average by just under 9% per year. We don't have a month, maybe like we have 1 month out of 12 every year where we don't go forward in our membership, and that's because we've got to deregister all these people that are leaving all the time. That type of growth is, on one hand, I don't say, okay, every union should be doing that, because we're in a growth industry as well, and that's got to be acknowledged. So it's not right to say to the metal workers, oh, well, you're not growing by 9% a year, we're a better union than you, when their industry is shrinking. It's just ridiculous. But for us, that type of growth just doesn't come about. Like, you can't sit on your hands and let that happen. You've got to fight damn hard to make it happen. So the tactics that we use in our campaigns are a range of tactics. We've obviously got a whole legal strategy. That's the case in Fair Work Australia that we're running. We've got a whole political strategy, which is obviously focused on lobbying those people who have the power to fund our wage increases. We've got electoral campaigning that we do, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have lobbying, which happens at electoral levels, as well as obviously in Canberra or obviously in New South Wales as well. We have very localised activities, so when we have a day of action, our members decide what happens in different regional areas. So, for example, in Lismore, I don't know what other union has someone dressed up as a bloke dressed up as Julia Gillard leading the march. So, but that's for Lismore. That's what the members would do there.